On Wednesday morning, a single post appeared on a secure channel, a post that every Air Force commander, every defense contractor, and every adversary military analyzed with absolute, undivided attention. For the first time in history, an F-35 had executed a manned air-to-air kill. The aggressor, an Israeli F-35 Adir. The target, an Iranian Yak-130, flying a defensive patrol. The location was the critical data point, deep inside enemy airspace, directly over the capital city of Tehran. This was not a dogfight, it was an assassination. The Iranian pilot was on a routine flight, completely unaware. He almost certainly never knew the F-35 was there until the missile's terminal impact. A perfect kill. A clean dataset demonstrating an unprecedented level of stealth penetration. So then, how in that exact same theatre of operations, on that exact same night, did CENTCOM end up issuing a flat denial for a combat loss of one of its own? An F-15. The denial from CENTCOM was absolute. The event, however, was a matter of physics. On March 5, 2026, Iran's IRGC claimed it had downed a US F-15E Strike Eagle in the airspace near Tehran. The American response was instantaneous. A formal statement from Central Command declared the claim baseless and not true. No US aircraft were lost. A paper reality was established. Here is the core of the contradiction. The system that Iran claimed made the kill was an air defense battery that US intelligence briefings had publicly, repeatedly declared paralyzed. Yet it apparently reached up and tore a $40 million fighter jet from the sky. Official statements are one thing, but ground truth is another. And the ground truth appeared in the skies over Lavasan, a district of Tehran itself, not as a press release, but as a fiery arc, followed by the undeniable visual of two pilots ejecting. Two small blossoms of silk against the glow of the city below. A historic kill and a humiliating loss in the same airspace on the same day. The official briefings are already contradicting the battlefield. For those who've seen this script before, what was the first red flag for you? Let's map the pattern in the comments. So how do you reconcile an impossible shot with an absolute denial? The error is in looking for the answer in the hardware. The real answer lies in the strategic software, a new doctrine written by Iran, born directly from a devastating defeat they suffered years before. That defeat taught Tehran a lesson paid for in blood. Centralized systems are targets. The solution was to disappear. Following their losses in the fictional June 2025 conflict, Iran executed a complete doctrinal pivot. They abandoned their large, static, easily targetable air defense sites, the very ones US intelligence marked as paralyzed. Instead, they embraced a distributed, mobile, and deeply concealed network. This isn't speculation. A Foreign Policy Research Institute analysis confirmed it. Quote, some air defenses damaged but replaced with pre-arranged mobile systems stored in suitable locations. This new architecture is designed for one purpose: first strike survivability. Think truck-mounted Matla-ul-Fajr, variant radars that can light up, guide a missile, and relocate in minutes. Think a new €500 million deal for 500 Russian Verba Manpads launchers. That's 2,500 missiles to guarantee low-altitude lethality against incoming ordnance. It's an asymmetric response that makes traditional suppression of enemy air defenses, or CD, almost obsolete. You cannot destroy a target that is not there. That solves the first paradox. It explains how a ghost in the machine took down an F-15. But it does not solve the second, the Israeli F-35 Adir over Tehran. That required an offensive innovation just as radical as Iran's defensive one. The strategic problem for Israel was always range. A direct flight to Tehran and back required aerial refueling, making vulnerable tanker aircraft the mission's Achilles heel. The solution was a technological game-changer, custom-designed stealth external fuel tanks. This proprietary technology allowed the F-35 to fly directly from Israel to its target, eliminating any reliance on tankers or Allied airspace. It fundamentally redrew the strategic geometry of the region. This wasn't just a dogfight, it was a referendum on two competing philosophies of war: distributed resilience versus concentrated stealth projection. And while the technology on both sides was a staggering success, it was all in service of a paper victory. A tactical masterstroke that completely failed to achieve the strategic objective. You see, the F-35 strike was never about a single target. It was the kinetic trigger for a full-scale regime change operation. And that operation had already failed before the F-35's wheels left the runway. The objective, on paper, was clinical. Regime change. Kinetic strikes would trigger a popular uprising, installing the exiled monarch Reza Pahlavi as the new head of state. It was a clean flowchart on a briefing slide. A paper victory, engineered in Washington and Tel Aviv, assuming an infrastructure of popular support that simply did not exist. Instead of a revolution, there was only the percussive shock of ordnance. Instead of crowds in the streets, there were families in basements, listening to the city burn, feeling the tremors through concrete. The streets were empty. The uprising was a fiction. This script is a rerun, a pattern. In 2003, the man was Ahmad Chalabi, promising American forces would be met with the flowers in Baghdad. Today, the name is Reza Pahlavi. As Columbia professor Behzad Gamari Tabrizi notes, Pahlavi is an Israeli-American project, not the organic choice of Iranians. The Brookings Institution's own post-mortem confirms this operational void. The plan, they state, was not just uncertain, Pahlavi's role was vague and divisive, with no clear internal organization. A leader with no network. A revolution with no revolutionaries. This is not an intelligence failure. It is a feature, not a bug. It is a repeatable operating system for disaster, perfected by prioritizing the convenient fictions of exiled elites over the resilient ground realities. This system doesn't just produce battlefield losses. It guarantees the gross misallocation of capital and prolongs the very instability it claims to solve. To understand the source code for this system, we must return to its purest expression. One man, one vial of inert powder, and the moment Colin Powell sold the world on Iraq. February 5th, 2003. The location is the UN Security Council. The man is Colin Powell, America's most trusted general, now Secretary of State. The weight of the world's attention is focused on this one man. His task, to make the final, definitive case for war in Iraq. The intelligence was ambiguous. The Allies were skeptical, so the administration deployed its most valuable strategic asset. That asset was not a satellite image. The asset was not a secret source. The asset was Colin Powell's credibility. For 75 excruciating minutes, he laid out the case. He held up a vial, a prop representing anthrax, a visual anchor for the fear he was tasked to instill. And then he delivered the kill shot, the line that leveraged a lifetime of honor. He looked at the world and said, "Every statement I make today is backed up by solid sources. These are not assertions." The world believed him, because the world believed in him. Of course, the intelligence was catastrophically wrong. It was a fiction. There were no stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction, No WMDs were ever found. A war was launched on an illusion, sold by a good man. And for Powell, the consequence was not political. It was spiritual. Years later, he said this, his words, "It was painful. It's painful now. I'm the one who presented it on behalf of the United States to the world, and it will always be a part of my record. It has blotted my record." A blot, the perfect clinical word for a legacy forever stained. That was the price of a failed Plan A in 2003. But what happens when the playbook is run again, and Plan A fails now? When the regime doesn't fall, and the street doesn't rise? That's when the operators, the architects of these plans, get desperate. That's when they turn to Plan B. And Plan B is always the same. When regime change from the outside fails, you engineer civil war from the inside. The primary lever is to activate and arm ethnic minorities. In this case, reports from sources like the Council on Foreign Relations confirm the play, coordinating with Iranian Kurdish coalitions like the KDPI to trigger an uprising. This is not a new playbook. This is a carbon copy, a ghost from 1991. That year, President George H.W. Bush publicly called on Iraqi Shiites and Kurds to take matters into their own hands to overthrow Saddam Hussein, and they did. They seized 30 of Iraq's 18 provinces, a stunning success, a tactical victory on the ground. And then, the strategic reversal. The United States military stood by and allowed Saddam's helicopter gunships, helicopters they explicitly permitted to fly in the no-fly zone, to methodically crush the uprisings city by city. The cost of this policy? Let's quantify it. According to Human Rights Watch and the BBC, the result was between 30,000 and 60,000 Shiites massacred, approximately 20,000 Kurds killed, 1.5 million people displaced. That is the precedent. That is the operational history for the exact same plan being resuscitated today. But this isn't just about repeating a moral catastrophe. It's about repeating a fiscal one. Because every one of these strategic blunders, every one of these ghost operations comes with an invoice, an unseen invoice that eventually gets presented for payment. And in the next few minutes, we are going to audit that invoice. We will map this geopolitical playbook directly to the risks accumulating in your portfolio right now. Let's translate this strategic failure into the only language that matters for capital preservation. Portfolio risk. The pivot to Plan B is not a foreign policy adjustment. It is a forced asset reallocation from a failed blue-chip venture into a high-risk, unrated junk bond called Proxy Warfare. This is not a low-cost alternative. It is a trigger for predictable, second-order economic shocks. The mechanism is simple. Prolonged, asymmetric conflicts guarantee sustained disruption in critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. The recent strikes drove immediate oil price surges of 10 to 13%. Analysts now forecast upside risk to over $100 per barrel. This is not speculation. This is the direct, mechanical result of spiking shipping costs and insurance premiums in a contested waterway. The briefings call these operations low cost. The data shows a different ledger. A ResearchGate counterfactual study on proxy warfare in the region calculates a cumulative GDP loss of $373.7 billion. For a country like Yemen, the annual hit averaged 53% of its GDP. This is the true cost, mirroring the multi-trillion-dollar bleed from the Iraq War that continued long after the victory banners were put away. This predictable instability creates a capital mandate. Smart money flows out. It exits broad, vulnerable portfolios and rotates into hard assets, into commodities, into energy equities. This is a hedge against the stealth inflation and opportunity costs imposed by a war with no end date. It is the unseen invoice coming due. But this macro-level analysis, tracking oil prices and shipping lanes, is only the first layer. The most advanced signal is not in the financial markets. It's on the battlefield itself. When you learn to read operational data, an event like an F-15 being shot down by a degraded enemy system stops being a military headline. It becomes a real-time market indicator, pricing in a reality that official briefings will deny for months. And next, I will show you precisely how to decode these signals. That contradiction over Tehran is not a military scorecard. It is a balance sheet. And sophisticated capital reads two variables from that balance sheet above all others: proxy resilience and escalation probability. The F-35's historic kill is the revenue item, printed in bold on the front page of the press release. A paper victory. The F-15 loss. That is a catastrophic cost of goods sold, hidden in a footnote. Smart capital reads the footnotes it has to. Because the net margin here isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in strategic survivability and supply chain friction, and that margin is collapsing. The signal being transmitted is the erosion of the technological dominance narrative. When a proxy force demonstrates it can absorb a first world military strike and persist, the market recalculates. It prices in prolonged instability. And that pricing action is not abstract. It is a predictable capital rotation into hard assets: gold, broad commodities, energy infrastructure, critical logistics players. This is not theory. It is documented market behavior. A Morgan Stanley private wealth brief from that exact week confirms the global flight to safety. As S&P 500 futures saw a 3% drawdown, gold ETFs like GDX booked multi-billion-dollar inflows. The official briefing declared a historic kill. Simultaneously, capital voted with its feet, executing a risk-off rotation that mirrors the exact shift seen post-Iraq. But this capital shift isn't just about immediate headline volatility. Investors are mapping that battlefield data point onto a known historical penalty. A multi-decade difference in differences analysis from the Peterson Institute is clear. Comparing a basket of 20 economies plagued by recurring proxy conflicts against their stable peers reveals a cumulative 16% loss in projected GDP over 10 years. 16%. That is the unseen invoice taking form. That is the future cash flow being discounted in real time. So how do we systematize this? It becomes a simple, three-step protocol for translating battlefield contradictions into portfolio intelligence. 1. Isolate the paper victory real bleed dynamic. Look for the press release win that obscures a hidden strategic cost. 2. Quantify that hidden cost in operational terms: proxy resilience, supply chain exposure, escalation risk. 3. Pre-map the resulting capital rotation. Acknowledge that this signal reliably triggers flows out of broad market equities and into specific non-correlated hard assets. This is the doctrine. We now have the tactical reality, the strategic failure, and the financial verdict. All three signals are synchronized. With this doctrine, we can assemble them into a coherent, forward-looking strategy. So we arrive at the final accounting. The double drama over Tehran, a historic kill for the F-35, a humiliating loss for the F-15, was the perfect symbol for the entire operation. A brilliant tactical illusion concealing a strategic train wreck. This outcome was not an accident. It was a predictable feature of the plan's design. Remember the core irony, the quote that defines this entire misadventure. The bombs that were supposed to liberate them have ended the political space in which their liberation was actually developing. the means obliterated, the stated end. This is the unseen invoice. The bill for the proxy wars, the long-term resource drain, the capital flight from manufactured instability, the cost that never appears in the victory briefings but is always paid in full. Our mission here is to make that invoice visible. We map the hidden capital drivers that official narratives obscure. If you want to see the unseen invoice before it comes due, make sure you are subscribed.